walk into the restaurant.
I grabbed a vase and I smashed it over the back of his
one
head.
of those girls on the poster. Papa, did you enjoy the striptease?
He was a liar. He had lied to me about everything.
I think I became a lesbian that night. Giving me a heart attack. And then he laughed.
The scream is powerful.
We're all gonna die. We're all going to die.
My daughters are giving birth to larvae, and it's my birthday.
I'm just gonna tell it like it is.
We were really worried that our parents, my mother, my dad, his father, his brothers, the aunts, the uncles, we weren't sure who the they were, but we thought that all of the family might actually come after us.
It occurred to me that she was right, but I couldn't believe. I mean, Panayoti loved me a lot, and I made sure I told her. I was like, well, but Panayoti treats me like a queen, and she said, of course he does. Everyone gets treated like a queen before they get that rock on their finger.
Tell it like it is.
I think it was when I was 10 years old that I realized that maybe I had a crush on him. He was a university student. He was 19, and he had this big Kirk Douglas dimple in his chin. We'd play, and I'd sit on his lap and run my fingers through his curly hair. I was quite smitten with my mother's cousin. He and I are second cousins, and he's 9 years older than I am.
When I was 26, I had decided to go to Greece, and I fell in love with a Greek sailor. He was really cute. He looked like Tom Cruise, and he had great hands.
Many years later, I was 18 and he was 27. I hadn't seen Wilf in a long time. He'd been away in California at university. And he walked in and I looked at him and I said, "Oh, you used to be so gorgeous. What happened to you?" And he probably thought I'm going to make her pay. But at the same time, he noticed me. I wasn't 10 years old anymore.
I knew that I had found the right Greek man because he didn't actually want to come to Canada. He wanted me to meet his family, which is always a big sign in the Greek culture. And it meant that, in essence, I really was the one.
Well, my grandmother phoned me and said, so if Wilfred were to call you, would you go out with him? And I said, sure I would, but why would he call? Oh, we've been sitting around talking about it, and we thought it would be a good idea if he took you out because nobody was really very impressed with the boy that you've been going out with because he bums cigarettes. I thought that would be the end of it, but in fact, a few days later, Wilf did call.
And we went to meet his family. Panayoti's mother said to me, I don't care where you came from, how well you speak the language, you're in, you're mine.
After the movie, we'd had a very good time. We went home and got to the front door, and I said, well, good night, I had a really good time. And he said, well, how about a kiss goodnight? And I didn't know what to say because, of course, I'd been thinking about that all day. And so then he said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll flip you for it. And he took out a coin. And, of course, I won or he lost or whatever, but we kissed goodnight. And I guess it was at that moment that I knew I wasn't going to see my boyfriend anymore.
And with that, his mother went over to my gear and took all my stuff out of my room and moved it into his room, which I thought was a really good sign. I did have to admit, hey, my mother wouldn't go for this, by the way. My Canadian mother, no, this wouldn't happen. To which she replied, hasta Katharina, your mother's in Canada. Who cares?
Much to the chagrin of my parents, we were dating 2-3 times a week because they thought I was too young. My mother was already giving me a hard time saying, you know, don't get serious about this because you're related. And so I went and spoke to my family doctor. We talked about it and he assured me that there was absolutely nothing to be concerned about.
So that was the beginning of being part of Panayoti's family. And every year consecutively I would go over to Greece and spend the summers with him while he finished his conscription. And it wasn't till the third summer, I had taken a job during the winter at the Four Seasons Hotel. I'd met this bellman named Andrew, who was fantastic, and we used to meet in the storeroom all the time. He used to page me all the time and say, yeah, because I worked for the concierge department as a messenger and had my little pager, and he would page me and he'd say, meet me in storeroom B, you know, bring the cigarettes and I'll get the wheelchairs out. And we'd sit in the luggage room and smoke madly on our breaks. And one day he paged me and said, quick, meet me in storeroom B, I've got a surprise. And lo and behold, he popped down 2 tickets to Paris, knowing that I was going to go to Greece for the summer, and said, let's go to Paris first and make our way through France, and we'll just have a time of it, and I'll, go my way to Spain, and you can go on over to Greece and see Panayoti. And we did. We were gone within 48 hours.
About 3 days before I left for this trip to Europe, he said, you know, when you get back, I'd like to get married. I was gone 2 months, 8 full weeks. I called him when I got home. It was the first thing that I did. He came over, and we went into my bedroom where I was unpacking my bag. And as we kissed for the first time in the 2 months that I'd been away, he pulled this box out of his pocket, and my mother was standing outside the door saying, I want that door left open. So we became engaged that night and immediately started making wedding plans.
Andrew and I have a mad time in Paris. We decided to hitchhike south. And we get out in Digne one night late, and we're tired. And I leave my portfolio in the back of the car, and Andrew leaves his camera bag. And there's no malintent here. I mean, these people didn't mean to drive off with it. It's just one of those things where we were tired and not thinking and closed the door and thanked them very much, and they drove off with all their belongings. So now he's lost his identification, a lot of his cash, his camera, and I've lost my visa and all my American traveler's checks. There is no Canadian consulate. There is just the French consulate. And they give us what they consider to be traveling papers. Andrew went his way, eventually, and I went my way through Italy to Brindisi to try and catch the ferry over to Greece. So I get to the port in Brindisi, and I'm escorted off the boat by the Greek authorities because I don't have the proper identification.
We just couldn't agree on anything. I told them all I wanted was a small wedding in the rabbi's study, just the family, and my dad said no, he couldn't make a wedding like that. They wanted a big wedding. Everybody had an opinion, and those opinions were very different than my opinions. And that kind of set the tone.
So I find myself alone in a port at 10 o'clock at night, and I went under a bridge, and I got mugged by 2 huge skinheads. They have cut my bag and stolen everything out of it. I get roughed around, but I am not resisting at all. They can have whatever they want at this point. And I look up and see the Brindisi Polizia sign after they have taken off, and I run towards the police station. One guy took my bag behind the desk, and the other guy took me downstairs. Now, I thought we were going to go fill out forms or something, but it turns out that he actually starts to touch my hair and tell me what beautiful eyes I have. And I realized I put myself in a horrible position. So I literally knee him right in the nuts, and I take off because I know these guys are going to be of no help.
I didn't realize that there would be family tensions. After about 3 days of wedding planning and discussing, I said to Wilf, why do we have to go through all this wedding stuff? And he said, good, let's elope. The adventure began.
Tell it like it is. Ooh, oh, oh.
The first step was to get our marriage license. He was really nervous, and I didn't find out why until he told me that his dad was coming that day to get his marriage license. We walked into the license office, and there was my cousin. I didn't even know she was getting married. And there she was, and I was a nervous wreck, but we told her we were just getting our license for our wedding, which was going to be in December. And we found out afterwards that his dad had walked in the front door as we were walking out the back door. We missed them by seconds. We wanted to keep this secret because we knew they'd try to stop us.
And I run back out into the port, and all the trucks that have gotten off the ferry are now in what looks like an Apache wagon-style circle under a light, and I can see the Greek flag. So I run to them, and in my broken Greek, I tell them that I've been robbed and that I have no identification, I have no money, and that I have to make a phone call. And the first truck driver says that he would be glad to take me to a phone, the problem being that it's 11:30 at night, and they have to get their trucks out of Brindisi by midnight, or they'll be fined. It's a plan at this point.
The next step was to see the rabbi. We figured this was the least of our problems. We went to see him, and the rabbi said, asked us all kinds of questions, and then he said, well, do your parents know? And we said, no. And then he said, no, I can't marry you. He didn't want to get involved, and mostly he didn't want to upset my parents, who were the members of the congregation.
So I clamber up the 18 gazillion stairs that are on the side of an 18-wheel truck. And we pass phones. I mean, I see phones in motel lots, and I'm like, there's a phone, there's a phone. But he doesn't stop. He keeps swigging whiskey. He's got this whiskey bottle between his legs, and he's driving this huge convoy truck, and he's drinking and he's drinking. 2.5 hours later, we come through this orchard, and all the truckers get together, and again, this Apache wagon-style circle, and they start to cook, and they start to pour themselves a drink, and they start to have dinner. I don't want to eat. I feel nauseous. And I realize after dinner, as they start to stare at me and tell me I have beautiful eyes and beautiful skin that I'm about to be dessert. So I'm going to just go shut myself up in the cab and try to be safe. And of course, 10 minutes later, guess who's coming to dinner? But the guy that owns the truck. And that becomes a wrestle. I mean, I'm wrestling now with that, a Greek man that weighs about 250 pounds. And I start to use a Bic lighter. And I start to fend him off with my lighter. And eventually he gets a message, and he gives up. And he says, okay, don't worry about it. And he falls asleep. And I sit in the cab all night waiting.
All right, what do we do now? The second step of this elopement plan was not working. And Will said, well, we'll just go out to City Hall and get married, no problem. And he said it with such authority that I just assumed that was all we had to do.
And at the crack of dawn, I wake him up, and I'm speaking very articulately now, and I'm telling him to get up, we need to get to a phone. At which point, the other drivers start to knock on the door and say things like, there's a yorti, and they start to talk about a yorti, which means holiday in Greek. And I'm asking what holiday it is, and they say it's a holiday in Italy, and that Friday is a holiday in Italy, and that if they were to drive the transport trucks on the highway on a holiday, they will get fined.
So his friend Curly and my friend Pat were on standby. Pat stayed over that night with me. We handed my suitcase out the window. We put it into Wilf's car the night before. And then in the morning, she and I took off about 8 o'clock, and we went over to Wilf's. And we called down to City Hall to say we're coming down. What would be a good time for us to get married today? And they said, we can't marry you because you don't have an appointment. And Will said, well, we'll just go down there and you'll see they'll marry us. We went down to City Hall. They tell us, I'm sorry, we can't marry you. We don't have any time. You don't have an appointment. The people at the downtown City Hall office directed us to the Salvation Army. And that's really when the wheels started to fall off.
Joe, of course I think this is crazy. I'm not staying here. So I climb down from the truck. I, grab my stuff in my bag that's slashed and start walking down what would sort of look like an aerial view of the prairies, with that one lonely road that kind of is down the center of the patchwork quilt. That's kind of what I'm walking on. And these guys catch up to me and they say, Katharina, you're crazy. You have no identification, you have no money. I mean, Italian man's not going to take no for an answer. At least we're Greek and we speak the same language and we understand that you want to get to Greece and see Panayotti and that you're going to get married, that you're a good girl.
So we're sitting in the chapel at the Salvation Army waiting for Major Sloan. Curly is playing the organ, and I start to cry. I have to tell you, the reputation of the Salvation Army in looking after wayward girls, that's why I started to cry when I was sitting in the chapel. It was like, what am I doing here? I'm a nice Jewish girl. I haven't done anything wrong. I was mortified, but determined to get married. So determination overcame all of that other anxiety.
My gut tells me these guys are right. So I stay with them for Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. In a desert riddled with holes, garbage, flies. I didn't comb my hair. I didn't brush my teeth. I didn't change my clothes. I was covered in this clay-like terrain. And oddly enough, I found that the guy that made the most sexual innuendos was actually the safest. And the guy that tried to protect me the most was actually the most dangerous. He was the one that followed me behind the truck and tried to make moves on me all the time. And come the Monday, these guys were carrying these huge tubes that go into the ground, these construction tubes, and they had to wait for the Italian construction team to come and put them in the ground. And I don't know if you've ever seen a Southern Italian construction team work, but it's not very fast.
When I didn't show up for work, my parents called Wilf's employer. And they said, is Wilf there? And they said no, that he had called in sick and had taken the day off. And that's when they became really suspicious. We knew that our parents would find out by then and they'd be after us. I don't know how we figured they'd find out, but we had to be out of town and on our way.
And now, lo and behold, they can take me to a phone. Except we travel north for 2.5 hours and we get outside Brindisi at 11:30 at night. And they drop me off because they couldn't drive within city limits. So they leave me on the outskirts of Brindisi 5 days later without a dime and without having made my phone call.
Tell it like it is.
Major Sloan showed up and he said yes, he could marry us, but he couldn't marry us till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon because he didn't have his book of ceremonies. And by this time, Wilf was so exasperated, he said something like, I'll just tell you what to say. Just sign the papers. All we want to do is get married and we got to get out of here. And 4 o'clock is too late because they're going to come looking for us, because we knew that nobody was going to approve of this. So he said, I'm sorry, I can't marry you till 4 o'clock this afternoon, but if you go over to the Metropolitan United Church, there's a very nice Reverend Dr. McCready, and he might be able to marry you.
I proceeded to walk into Brindisi, and underneath the light was a guy on a moped, and I asked him if he could speak English, to which he replied yes, and I asked him if he knew where a moderately priced hotel was, to which he replies, I can take you to a moderately priced hotel, just hop on the back of my bike, I'll be glad to take you there. And I was like, yeah, right, I'll walk, not being very trustworthy at this point. So we walk into town, I and my bag and my clay-covered hair and head, and we go to a little pension that has very little signage outside. I'm still not even sure if this is really what it appears to be. I'm hoping to God that it is. The man comes out, the receptionist from behind the desk, and he says, Buonasera. And I begin to tell him quite quickly what happened. Solo ragazza 5 giorni. Oh no, he phones his wife, who comes up from downstairs. And as soon as I see a woman looking at me, this maternal instinct, I just completely collapse.
I was just a basket case. 19 years old, standing eloping, knowing my parents were probably calling the police. We walked across the Metropolitan United Church and we met Reverend Dr. McCready. We told him we wanted to get married. He said he could marry us. Wilf said, how soon? And he said, oh, it'll take a few minutes. And Wilf said, how few? And he said, about 5. And Wilf said, okay, you're on.
I kept telling them, I have no money, no soldi, I kept saying, no soldi. At which point they said, no problem, Papa Americano. They just knew I was a phone call away from safety, so they had no problem with me staying there.
I don't remember very much about the ceremony, except that when he asked us to hold hands, he asked me to put my right hand in Wilf's hand, and I was completely numb, and I couldn't remember which was my right hand. Wilf had to reach over and take my right hand. Can you imagine? Dr. Reverend McCready's words, which were, if I marry you, you're married, were very reassuring. The next thing I remember, we were in the car. Off we went to New York City. And if we were smart, we would have just stopped in Niagara Falls because we spent the whole weekend driving on the New York State Thruway. I called my parents and said, hi. And they said, why did you do this? And so I told them, and they said, well, we know all of that, but why did you do this? And I said, well, we'll talk about it when I get home.
I ended up going to Greece. Finally. Exhausted as I was, it felt like a nightmare. I had really about 2 days to spend with Panayotti. That wasn't very fun to have to say goodbye to him. I got to spend the rest of the summer with his family, and the 2 people I really got to know were his sisters very well, his sister and his sister-in-law. And it was probably towards the end of that summer that I felt confident enough to ask some questions that I hadn't really asked up to that point. The one thing that concerned me was that every time that Panayotti's sister fought with her husband, all the women would run to her door, and her husband would go off in the truck. And we would sit with her regularly and have cake and coffee. Nobody talked about anything, but we would sit and have cake and coffee. And I noticed this happened enough times, and I finally got up the courage towards the end of the summer to ask Matula, Panayotti's sister-in-law, if in fact we were preventing Herigula when we went to her house when they were fighting from getting hit. At which time Matula told me to sit down. This is not a democratic life, she said. We're the same age. I have 4 children. And every day I get up and I clean my house and I send my kids to school and I get up and I clean the fish store and I sell fish all day. And where's my husband? He's down in the cafeteria smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee. What have you always wanted to be? She asked me. And I replied, I'd always thought I'd make a good actress. And she encouraged me to go home and do that because I can. She made sure that I knew that she loved me and wanted me to be part of the family, but that really, if she was given the same opportunity, she would definitely go to Canada.
We left New York and we drove back to Toronto. We went straight to my parents' house, and Wilf's dad was there. They accepted the fact that we were married. They were really upset that we'd been married in a church. I said, well, we are married. They said, no, we want you to be married by a rabbi. So I said, fine, that we were prepared to go, and we thought we'd go on Tuesday. They said, why Tuesday? I said, well, I'd like to get my hair done, and my hairdresser's closed on Monday. And my mother looked at me with that look that said, yes, you really need to get your hair done. I know what you've been doing all weekend.
I couldn't help but think Matula was right, that I had somehow, as much as I wanted this to happen, I needed to leave there for what I knew would be the last time.
In a few weeks, on September the 6th, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary by renewing our vows. This will be the third time that we've done this. One of the things I was told by my parents and others that, we'd missed all the memories of a traditional wedding. And the truth is, I think they were wrong, because our memories are very special. We started our adventure together in a unique and special way.
I've come full circle, pretty much. Probably my most favorite project was having been cast in My Big Fat Greek Wedding and playing a bridesmaid. And I am very happy, and I did pursue my dream, but there is points and times when I wonder if Paniotti's family does recognize me. And I do wonder what my own Big Fat Greek Wedding would have been like. And I did pursue my dream. But sometimes I wonder what would happen if I had pursued my heart.
Trade him for anybody. He's a really good guy most of the time. I've always been so mean to him. I said, 40 years, that's like 2 life terms without parole. I do wonder what my life would have been like had I pursued my heart. I'd probably be some beaten fish wife. No, I better not say that.